I'm a gallery guy myself. I'm just going to put that out there.
I like to see the people also. So I also am recording this. I just want to let everybody know because we are going to store this on our on the website for our archives. So you'll be able to access it later. It's only for members, but if you're a member, you can sign in and view the archives after this. Well, I think we'll get started since it's 4:35. So I'm going to go ahead and share the presentation with everyone. All right. Oh, and just following, we'll do a quick little Zoom tutorial for those who are new to Zoom, following up a little bit with what Andy was saying. But first, I want to just let everybody know that we have a link here for you to open up the slideshow, and that will be really helpful for you as we go forward. So I would suggest everyone click on this or type this into your, I think Andy's going to put it in the chat for us. So you can click on it, or you can type it into a browser window so that you'll be able to follow along, because we will have some links in the presentation as we go. And I'm just going to do a quick intro to Zoom, and then I'm going to introduce our host for today. So if anybody has a problem finding the link, you can also type into the chat any questions, and one of us will come and help you with that. Okay, so for Zoom, we have it set up so everyone has been automatically muted this time when they come in. So to unmute yourself, you will click the unmute button, and just do that when you want to ask a question. We found for something with a larger group like this, it's really better to be muted as a default, just because sometimes there's background noise or something like that. So that's how you can unmute yourself. And when it's time to ask a question, feel free and go ahead and you can call it out, or you can type it in the chat. We're pretty informal, so it's up to you how you feel comfortable. There we go. And sorry, for some reason my slides are lagging. There we go. So you may want to share your screen at some point when we're meeting in a small group, probably not this time, but just so you know, if you're in a breakout room, you have the ability to share your screen if you have a document or something like that. And then you'll just have to remember to stop sharing if somebody else wants to share. And then we also have the chat button, which I think everybody has tried out now, but that's where you would find the button to open up the chat. And then when we do start clicking on some of those links, if you hit the escape button, that's how you get out of that full screen view that you may be in right now, so that you can find your web browser and open that up. And then you're also, as Andy said, you can change the view of the speakers. So I'm actually doing that right now. I'm dragging all of you around my screen so I can see the text on the screen. So you may want to try that. If you're having a hard time seeing the presentation, you can click and drag on the speakers, and you can also minimize that screen. You can take it all the way down to nothing, no images, or you can see everyone. It's up to you. So there's a few different options to play with so that you can find the setting that works best for you. And again, if anybody has questions about this, you can go ahead and type it in your chat, and Andy and I will try to help you out with that. So with that, I would like to introduce our hosts. We have Susan Holveck, who's joining us. She is the Science Program Administrator from Portland Public Schools. I don't know if you want to say anything else to introduce yourself. Oh, sorry, Susan, we can't hear you.
Oh, I'm also
there we go.
OSTA president.
Yes.
So just trying to support OSTA members and NGSS.
Thanks. And we have Berkeley Gadbaw. And Berkeley, I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm Berkeley. I'm a middle school science teacher. I currently teach 8th grade science at Catlin Gable School, and I've taught middle school science for about 15 years.
Great. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. So we have here, we're going to have another link that will be in the chat to open up a Padlet.
Excellent. So Susan and I were hoping to start today with just getting a little bit from you, which is what is one thing that you hope to learn from today's session. And another way to think about this is, what motivated you to use your time today to join us, and why are you here? What would be one thing maybe we can help share a little bit more about?
And if anyone's not familiar with the Padlet platform, when you click on the link in the chat, you simply double click on the background and it will pop up a note for you to start typing. And Berkeley's given you a frame to begin if you need it.
Maybe you could click on the link so we could see the Padlet.
Okay, I'm not seeing where I can start my Padlet.
It would just click anywhere and it will open up the box.
Okay, because there's a box there. All right. I have used this before, but
You have to go to the link that's in the chat.
Oh yes, if you're seeing my shared screen with
Yeah.
Padlet, that's not the actual one. You can edit.
Okay, it's just like, what?
Yes,
Okay.
I have done the same thing.
So where it says type message here, should I be typing there in the chat? I feel like I'm a techno idiot right now, but
You'll
Yeah,
probably
that will absolutely work. If you want to do that, I'd be happy to put that up on the Padlet for you.
yeah, that'd be great because I don't want to hold this up.
That's great. And while we're updating Padlets, I know Leah mentioned this, but if at any point you have a question, you're welcome to put voice to that. Otherwise, you can use the chat, and we'll make sure that before that question leaves your mind, you can get it typed out, and then at the next sort of lull in the conversation, we'll get that asked for you.
Ooh.
I love reading these as they pop up. There's several themes about asking questions and developing students to how to foster students asking questions and student curiosity, as well as how to help others, or you're in a role of supporting teachers and wanting to make NGSS a little bit more user-friendly. So that's awesome.
And if we don't get to everything today, this will be good information for future webinars.
Beautiful. Are we waiting for a few more, or are we ready to go on, Susan?
Maybe we should move on just because we have a time limit.
Perfect.
But this will be useful if people want to add to this throughout the presentation, like as things arise, please feel free to do that. So Berkeley and I categorized 4 areas that we were going to address today that we feel are really important in moving instruction forward to next Gen-ify it. And we came up with these strategies and these areas of strategies that teachers could use with their current curriculum, because we realized that in the state of Oregon, there's quite a large variability about teachers having access to NGSS curriculum. And really, it's not the curriculum that it's important, it's really what we're doing with students, that we're moving to a more student-centered approach where they're explaining their ideas and they're constructing meaning, and we are hearing what it is that they know and how we can help them learn better. So one of the key things that we really feel is important is that there is an anchoring phenomenon. This is something that those of us who have done NGSS over the years have seen greater and greater understanding of this. And an anchoring phenomenon is just what's driving the unit. It gives the purpose for students to learn. And we feel that it's really important that these phenomenon are in the real world, that students can explain things that they're experiencing, such as how do I smell or how can I smell, in scientific ways, so that science is seen to be something that's happening all the time, everywhere, and not something that we just read about in a textbook. So we're going to give some examples about this throughout the unit, but I think we can go to the next slide. And one of the things that we want is that this driving question board. So we're presenting a phenomenon to students, such as how can I see the setting sun, crescent moon, Venus, and Jupiter at the same time? And this is something that I was sitting on a balcony at a beach house and looking out over the ocean and just wondering, like, how is it that I can see this? Venus is closer to the sun than the Earth. Jupiter is further away from the sun than the Earth, but yet I could see all of these things at the same time. So we want to present a phenomenon to students, but then we want to elicit their questions. Like, what do they already know about that? And so the first tool that Berkeley is going to talk about is the driving question board.
Cool. Can you go back, Leah, 2 slides? I think one was missed and I want to make sure it gets in there. Yeah. So this is just a visual for what it might look like in a classroom. And this is an example of a phenomenon where students were going to be studying genetics, but instead of just saying this is the next unit we're talking about, the question was posed, why do I look the way I do? And I taped a mirror up there and had mirrors at tables initially to start this. But the process basically of once a question is posed, if you think of a great phenomenon and compose the question, a driving question board is a place where students can share their own questions within that. And so for this unit, a student might ask, why is my hair brown, but my sister's hair is blonde? Or why do I have the skin color that I have? Or how come 2 twins sitting in our class look identical, whereas others on my basketball team do not? So the purpose of the driving question board is once a phenomenon is introduced, the student voice is heard and really drives the instruction. And so in my class, I like to have them put their questions on sticky notes, and then we sort of publicly share those questions. And it's great for students to be able to refer to, or if I want to again, bring it back to how the reason we're studying this is because they're really curious about this. I oftentimes will go over to the driving question board and pull one of their questions or reference that. And so even though this looks like total chaos, there's a little bit of method to the madness, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But you can see a little bit how questions get clustered together. So we might start by all sharing our questions, but as we're doing so, the questions will get clustered into groups. And I have a different example of what that might look like. Thank you. So I just wanted to share this piece of the driving question board that sometimes gets skipped when you just see a picture of it, and that is sort of the process of sharing. Because one of the things that I really encourage students to do, and I think is so important if you're going to have students arguing from evidence and questioning each other, is that they really get in the habit of listening to one another. And so as students share their ideas, I was wondering, the hair color, why I have hair color the way I do. When the next student shares, they're tasked with either making a connection explicitly to, I would like to connect, to Berkeley's question because I was asking about eye color and I think that's similar or whatever. Or I have a different idea. I'm wondering, if what I eat influences the way I look. And so that might be a completely different question. And so this is a very public, as I said, sharing of ideas and really fosters curiosity with kids. So it's an exciting place in our classroom, my classroom.
And one of the reasons why we think that this is really important is that we want every student to feel that those questions that they have about the world, about the phenomenon, are going to be answered in their science classroom. And that buy-in builds student engagement and also helps them understand the purpose of a science education, that it's not just for the kids who are going to become scientists and engineers, but it's for every person in the world who's living in the world and has questions. We're providing them ways and methods to be able to answer those questions.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is just a different example, again, having to do with the study of space, but my purpose in including this picture is just to reiterate that it's the student inquiry and curiosity that is driving the instruction. So I might know already that my learning objective includes phases of the moon, but when it's worded in kids' language, that might sound differently. Does light have anything to do with how we see the planets, or does light have anything to do with how we see the moon phases? And so even though I have a sense of where my, what lessons I might be doing, the buy-in is so much higher from the student perspective once they know that their questions are, a valid part of this process. And so, again, once they've shared their questions, you can kind of cluster them as a teacher and make sure you're wording it in language that makes sense for, take a cluster and word it in language that makes sense for where you're headed with your curriculum as well. But students hear their voices and see their voices as very relevant.
And one of the things that I've heard Berkeley talk about is that initial time that you go and you're opening up the classroom for student questions, that teachers sometimes can be afraid that students are going to ask questions that aren't part of the curriculum. And what she has found after doing this for many years is that the questions that students ask are generally inform the unit you already had planned. And are just willing to go out and try this with students and have every student's question posted up there, organized into a category. Maybe there's that one sticky note that doesn't quite fit, but that is maybe a personal aside to a student sometime during the unit who has that question. But we can't overestimate the buy-in that this strategy will give you as a teacher.
Thank you.
So once we kind of honor that science instruction is actually going to answer the questions that students have about the world, the next thing that we really want to do, and the high leverage practice, is student discourse. And we really feel that students need to be talking more in the classroom. We know that many teachers and classrooms across Oregon have students who have English as a second language, but in general, there is a lot of academic vocabulary and concepts that are in science that are new to every student. So we want students to learn how to talk to each other productively, and that student-to-student discourse that many teachers find to be elusive. We think that if we use certain strategies and protocols and teach the students how to talk, that student discourse and talk will become more productive in your classroom. So we're going to share 3 strategies that we consider to be high leverage. We know that there is a lot more out there, but these are the 3 that Berkeley has used in her classroom quite extensively.
The first tool, some of you may already have had some experience with, but I first ran into it at the NSTA conference and at an Activate Learning session, and I was not only loved trying it out with my colleagues, but then have had great success with using this in the classroom. So rather than talking you through it, we wanted to give you an opportunity to use this tool. And this particular sort of structured dialogue I like, especially because it, again, emphasizes listening as much as speaking. And it's a very simple tool, so you can use it in a number of contexts. But we are going to share it with you and then give you an opportunity to practice with it as well.
So if you can push on the link there.
Yeah.
And the AB Partner Protocol link has been posted in the chat if you haven't found it.
Excellent. So if you're looking at the tool, as you can tell, this kind of alternates between a listening and a speaking role. And again, as a speaker, you have several prompts that you can choose. And I found this to be most effective if I'm giving a very discrete amount of time for students to use this tool. So in my classroom, I'll say we have 2.5 minutes for this entire dialogue to happen. And I can kind of judge if I need to stop the timer or give them a bit more time. But I would recommend not just open-ended, go and use this tool. They should know that there's a little bit of a time crunch, and then the partners will switch roles too. So we wanted to give you a chance to sort of try this and then have a little discussion about that experience. So Leah, oh, we can't hear you, sorry.
So you'll be seeing an invitation to join a breakout room with a partner.
All right. And there's a video we want to show too. Leah, is this a good time to do that?
Everybody should be in their rooms. Let's see. It looks like we have, oh, there we go. So what you can do is broadcast a message to everybody if you want to.
Oh, okay. So what we want to do is have them watch this video. Should we do that together first? I should have done that. Sorry.
Oh,
because they don't have anything to talk about right now.
I was going to ask, yeah, what's the prompt?
Yeah, so we want to set up the video for them to watch first.
Oh, okay. I'll bring it back. Sorry.
We're like, what?
That's
Okay.
all right.
They're coming back. Oh my gosh, that's just me being overly like amped on making sure the breakout rooms are ready.
Well, I didn't know. I was looking at your screen and I'm like, should I go back to the slideshow? But that's
I can't go back.
Yes. Okay. So I will open up the video and we'll watch that together.
Yeah, that'll be in the PowerPoint.
You can mute the video if there's
Okay.
no.
Okay. Hang on one second. And is that the next? Oh, it's the next slide. Got it. I apologize. This slide 14 had the note to open the breakout room, so I was a little too eager.
Sorry about that.
Is everyone back?
Apologies to everyone. It was a little too soon with the breakout rooms. We're going to watch a video first.
So as you watch this video and as she's getting it set up, sorry. And if you go to about 108, I think it is, or maybe that's a different video. Sorry, nope. Yeah, a little bit in further. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead and play it. It'll just be in the background while I talk. Thank you. There we go. Good. Sorry. So if you, as you're watching this video, this is just going to be a demonstration. And so what we'll do is just, you'll decide when you get into your chat room who wants to be partner A, partner B. But this science teacher is going to put 4 little clumps of Crisco onto this metal rod, and then has it set up, as you can see, on a hot plate. And there's going to be a point where you get to make a very quick prediction. What do you think is going to happen when the hot plate is turned on? And the question works, so you can mentally make a note there. And then with your partner in your breakout room, so we'll watch what is happening. There we go. With your partner in your breakout room, you're going to be discussing how you might explain this video. And depending on where you are in the unit, you might provide a more specific prompt. How is thermal energy transferred between objects is the larger theme, but perhaps with this dialogue, just take a risk, and you can put your student hat on or teacher hat on. How would you explain what you just saw in the video? And now you can go out to
Okay. Great. We're going to go back to the breakout rooms now.
I personally think we need more videos with melting Crisco in them.
Yeah. Or just a chance to do it ourselves in person.
Yeah.
So are we just going to bring them back in a minute then, or?
Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah, do you want to go into a room and listen in, or?
That would be useful.
Okay, I will put you in a random room.
Well, thank you.
Let's see. And Susan, I'll put you in another room.
I'll be partner C, the invisible listener.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry.
There. Oh, okay, that's okay. So you are now partner A.
Okay, so I'm just going to continue on if that's
Yeah.
okay. So sort of, but my main thought was what's happening at the molecular level in order to get that heat to travel across that rod down towards the Crisco.
So what do you think? What do you think is going on? What do you think is going on at the particle level?
I think, shoot, I can't see the bottom part of this. I got to scroll down. I want to use the right sentence stem.
Very well.
Okay, answer my question. I think that the molecules are heating up and getting more energy, and that energy is transferred to molecules that are next to it.
Oh, okay. So again, the heat is causing the particles in the metal in the rod to go faster, which is then causing the molecules in the Crisco to go faster, turning them from a solid into a liquid, causing them to spill off of the rod. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
And I would ask, what evidence do you have for your idea of the molecule?
Yeah.
Ah.
So, I mean, we didn't get to see it up close, but I think the evidence then would be that the Crisco is definitely changing from solid to liquid. At least that would be some evidence that there's a state change going on which requires heat energy. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Thank you for letting me listen.
You're welcome. Thanks for listening in, Berkeley.
Berkeley, let me know when you think it's time to bring everybody
I think
back.
we're good. I'm going with that group. Yeah, go.
All right, cool. When people don't come back right away, I think they must be having a really good conversation.
It was really useful for me to be able to listen in on the conversation. And as a teacher, those are like my, formative assessment.
Yes.
Especially if I can block out the rest of the room and just listen to one set of kids, that is like the most useful time for me. So
Wow, they're taking their time coming back.
That's
Here we go.
have both of you used that before? Lori?
I haven't used something as scripted as this, but similar. But again, it was before, when I was high school, and I didn't have this lovely script, but there was still some facilitation of students trying to get them to ask each other, and to the listening piece, that's important. Yeah.
I can't tell if people are back, but
Are we back? Oh, yes.
I think we are, yes.
Yes. We were just saying it's always a good sign when it takes a minute for people to come back because they're having a good conversation.
So I was just going to put on my teacher hat for a moment, which I didn't do, when I gave the instructions and we went to partners. But I would definitely recommend slowing down and modeling this with a student before you're having your kids break out. So if you're using this tool at all, make sure kids are I model sitting down with your partner with the script in front of you with whatever it is, going back and forth, because otherwise students kind of tend to skip over a step or not think it's as important. And it can be about a different topic than the one you're going to present, but really to slow down and model the importance of not skipping over. With students, I don't know, attempt unanswered, those sorts of things are very useful. And then the second piece of advice I was going to say is I had a chance to go into one of the breakout rooms, and as a teacher, it's really important to sit down and listen to a pair of students dialogue in your classroom, and that's like a crucial piece of formative assessment. So I would just really encourage you. It's also like the best to get to hear what's going on, and NGSS is encouraging us to make student thinking visible, but also have a chance to use the science language. And so this is really a great tool for doing that and hearing students' comfort with it.
One of the things I would do, Berkeley, is I would take notes as I was going around and listening, and at the end, and then having the classroom conversation and bringing up some really good points that I had heard, which is always good because kids like, what? She was listening?
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Susan, did you want to add anything before we go? I don't hear her. Okay. I will keep, sorry.
Oh, I'm being unmuted. Okay. I was muted.
Okay, yeah.
Can you hear me now? One of the things that I saw Berkeley do to add on to what Laurie just said was she was facing the group and listening to their conversation, but she was actually listening to the group behind her and to take the notes. And they didn't know, so they were talking more naturally. Sometimes we find that when the teacher is there kind of looking like they're observing students, they aren't acting or saying the things that they might say if they didn't think they were being watched. So just the value of that.
Thank you. This second student talk tool, again, I think there's a number of tools available, but the idea that we are structuring conversations so that all students can have an opportunity, and it's expected that they participate in conversation. So regardless of their comfort initially, part of our classroom culture is to try to build in opportunities to share their voice and build on each other's ideas. And so the continuing the conversation is a piece that I have up in my classroom at every table all of the time. So students are able to build on each other's ideas or disagree with one another, and the language is there. And even having, it sounds so simple, and modeling using it. I use it all of the time. So when I'm listening to somebody, I will point to what I'm looking at, or how I'm processing their ideas, and say, oh, so what I hear you saying is this, or let's build on that idea, or I didn't realize that. And I model sort of using these ways that you can continue a conversation together, because ideally we want kids, that student to student dialogue, and the more familiar they are with this as a tool, the more that becomes a part of their lab work and their group work. On and on. I hear it with my students that they'll sometimes get really frustrated with their lab partner and reach over to grab the prompts and then say, I really would like to disagree with what you're saying, and that takes this, it just provides them some of the language that many kids need to enter a conversation. So the slide is a slide I might have up in a classroom at any time I'm going to be having a group discussion, just to remind them that these prompts are there, and it's an expectation that you're using them. So that is, you cannot say, I just agree with you. I agree with what so-and-so said. I'm done. But you have to be able to continue your idea and build on that. Thank you. And then the next slide is sort of our third little, I kind of think of this one as, it's like a sneaky way of getting students to talk. So I oftentimes will use a slide like this when students enter my classroom. And it's just like a warm-up opener, but again, makes the expectation of participating verbally, and gets them more familiar with scientific language, and really allows students to share ideas. And so this simple diagram and the prompt, complete as many sentences as you can by looking at the diagram. And then there's a bunch of vocabulary words next to it. But kids can go back and forth, and you can make it a competition or not. But again, just getting them to talk as much as possible. And so this is just one example.
So I think we might have skipped the slide. There we go. Okay, so so student discourse is really important, and it's one thing that we want to be using protocols and strategies to support students. The next high leverage practice that we feel is very important is making student thinking visible. We want to be able to use this formatively. How do we know what students are thinking? And we have a couple of models that we're going to show you. One of the things that we think is a really great investment for science classrooms are whiteboards. We find that when students can put their ideas down in a way that is almost temporary or easily erasable, they're more likely to actually share what they're thinking. So Berkeley and I buy shower board from Home Depot for about $14 for an 8x4 sheet. You get 8 whiteboards out of that, and so it's a pretty inexpensive way to start to see what students are thinking and to see how they're modeling their understanding of a science concept. So we're going to share 2 strategies for this. One of the things that teachers can do to support students in this process is to help them understand what it is that we want the model to include on the whiteboard. And this consensus model building can be done as a classroom, as students are modeling what they are learning on whiteboards. And you're going around and you're seeing that students have different explanations and different parts of the model down. And we can kind of go and do a gallery walk or a boardwalk and see what do we want all of the models to have that we're showing here today. We have a couple of examples. These are whiteboard models, and the model must-haves for this are that we want air to be shown as particle. And this was an experiment. This was a, I guess I should give you some background information. Students were using syringes, and they were putting their finger on the end, and they were plunging them to compress the syringe. They were expanding them, and then there were just like the normal without compression, without expansion. And different groups in the classroom are doing different things. So one group is doing this process with just air. Another group is doing it with water. Another group is doing it with a mini marshmallow inside of the syringe. And another group is doing it with a 1 centimeter plastic cube. So each one of these groups is building a model. So this whiteboard here is an example of a group that was just compressing and expanding air in a syringe. And we wanted the model to have certain features, to show air as a particle, that there was air both inside and outside of the syringe, that it was closed system within the syringe, but there was also something that was happening outside of the syringe. That we wanted them to show the density of particles and get to this idea of gas and spacing between molecules. So I think we'll go to the next example. And here's an example for a force and motion explanation for a skateboarder who was successful in going over a bump and unsuccessful where he failed. And so the student model, we're asking them to use some key words around force, balanced and unbalanced. What about gravity, friction, that you're using arrows to show direction. And when we provide, and as a group, like this isn't coming from the teachers, this is coming from students, that we find that the models improve over time. I think we had one more example. So this is an example of using a model checklist in an assessment, because we want that individual accountability. What are students learning? And I wanted to include that you can use a model checklist on an assessment. And number 1 and number 5 were ESL students. And I think you can see that students can show what they learn when you're using modeling, sometimes easier, and you can get a better understanding of their conceptual understanding of a particular science concept when they're using drawings and words in combination with each other.
I was just going to add to that. I think sometimes as a teacher, when we're writing the assessments, we are hesitant to include this. We think we're sort of giving it away by including a list of the vocabulary or telling them explicitly to draw and explain using a model. But I found quite the opposite, that the students who still have an understanding, that shows through, and then more students are able to show their understanding, but they sometimes would have otherwise forgotten the vocabulary or shown it clearly. And so having it posted in your classroom and then something similar applied to a new phenomenon is a really powerful way to see their growth and understanding.
I see a question, which is, are the model checklists given at the beginning or scaffolded as their ideas develop?
I would say I really like to build a model with my students as we experiment and play around. So for example, the one in the syringe, it would only be after we've had time to compress and expand that we might say, well, we have evidence now that there's space in between particles. And so let's always make sure our model shows that, or when it's in its gas form. And so I just think pieces like that, if you can build the model or even hold off on giving it at the beginning, it's meant to be something that students are constructing, because believe it or not, they have a model already of what is happening in their minds. And so as Susan said, our goal is to sort of shift that to be more accurate and show a deeper understanding that would be scientifically accurate. And so I think it's really important to build that model with your class. I don't know what you would add, Susan.
I just want to add, generally when we're doing modeling on whiteboards, we have groups of students that are modeling an explanation at their table, and every single group will have, their model will look different. So instead of just kind of stopping there and acknowledging that, yes, everybody's model looks different, having students go and share their boards with each other, or a gallery walk where they can see what different features students have, and then coming back and saying, what did you see on these whiteboards or in these models that helps us understand that gas molecules have space, so they can be compressed and take up less space, or expanded, take up more space, where liquid can't do that and solids can't do that. But marshmallows can, so that's a different kind of a solid. What's different about a marshmallow? So I think that it gets you into very rich conversations as you're developing that model checklist, and you may then go ahead and use that in a future experiment, like when you're trying to explain how smell gets across the room, and you have, a smell that starts off as a liquid is going to a gas, it's got to travel across the room, it's got to get to your nose. So these little kind of mini experiments that we're doing are building to that explanation of the anchoring phenomenon, which for that particular unit is, how do I smell?
One other question, Susan and Berkeley, that may come up in the minds of some. Berkeley, you're approaching this from a middle school perspective. Does this work the same way in an elementary classroom, in a primary classroom, in a high school classroom? Could you guys speak to that a little bit?
We use the whiteboard explanations in high school. Sometimes the high school curriculum that we are doing is using more mathematical kind of representations and mathematical models, but I think for the conceptual models, there's great value in that. And in elementary, we are putting these in our elementary units as we're writing them. And teachers are clamoring for whiteboards and markers, because it's really a productive way to see what every student is thinking in the room very quickly.
I just got to help unload those whiteboards today, actually.
So yes, it's one of the best investments you can make as a teacher, and it's reusable. You're not using paper, and there's great value to it.
Yeah. So we wanted to have a chance for us to build a criteria checklist, and I think we have time to do that. So our hope is to just show this quick video, and then I know this is going to be a couple of links here, but use the Padlet link to build a checklist together. So maybe you can add in, we'll play the video, and if you started at about a minute and 8 seconds, we'll just watch it. So this is, again, phenomenon and spacing of particles having to do with thermal energy.
Would we like sound on for this one, or no sound?
No sound, I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And again, so this is used in many units, or can be applied in matter and just about everything. So you'll just see, in a second here. Yeah, we're just adding 2 drops of dye or food coloring into, one is into cold water and one is into warm water, and just watching the movement of the dye. And so how could we, if we were trying to explain this with a model, what would we be looking for in our criteria model? You can pause it there. Start So as a group, let's see if we can come up with a checklist for what we would include in our model to try to explain this.
Just a reminder, you'll have to get out of your Zoom view and click on the link to get into the Padlet.
Thank you.
Yes, it's a different Padlet than the first one. And again, I'm happy to paste anything into the Padlet that if there's any technical difficulties out there.
So as I'm seeing, like, we want to show warm molecules moving faster, and with students we'd be dialoguing how do we show that movement the best? What communicates that information? So do we want to use arrows, or do we want to use squiggly lines, and what do we want those arrows to represent, and such. So we might be very so as you're using or responding, try to think about that. What would we want our model of matter to show clearly here? Nice. When we're, oftentimes, Susan, you do such a nice job of talking about this, but for students, we really want them to focus on how can we use models to explain the invisible, the parts that we can't see, that make the visible part help us understand what we see. And so if students are going to model, and they oftentimes start by drawing the beakers, we want to get them to zoom in. What do we think is explaining what we're seeing in the water? So I like this, that we have different particles for the dye and water, different shapes or colors. We could talk about that. Different arrows. Length of arrows might represent the different amounts of energy to show movement, less movement or more movement. Yeah. I think that how do we show that, or does density of the particles matter or not? If they have more energy, and they're bouncing off of each other, how do we want to represent that in our model as well? So all of these are pieces that can sort of come about as you're creating a model of particles with your students in your classroom.
I think we want to go back to the PowerPoint so we can at least finish up on our whiteboard.
Beautiful. So if this is called, this is just another technique to get student thinking visible, and it's called Four Corners Consensus Model. And the idea is you can just take a piece of paper and fold it twice, and then make a little diamond shape by folding it. But what this allows is, in each of the corners, 4 students can share their models or draw their models. And then after they have their individual model, students get a chance to share orally what they are thinking. And then as a group, any parts that they can agree on go into the center of the model. So in the next slide, you'll see an example where this was looking at smoke in a convection box and trying to explain convection currents. And you can see for some students it provides a nice safe space where as they're drawing their model, they can see others. So they know that, their ideas are, it just provides a little bit of comfort in terms of what they're willing to draw. And then you can also see that, some have only particles and that's how they're drawing it, where others, once they start to add words, and especially when they get to that center part of adding consensus or what parts they can come to consensus about, the models get stronger. So they're able to sort of articulate their ideas and build consensus. And this is just a great tool, again, to get students thinking made visible. One more.
So I know we're at our time, and we have a few remaining slides, but I don't know if we want to save this for another time or if you would like us to finish the two strategies we have for student explanations.
Susan, I'm gonna suggest that we save the claim evidence reasoning for a separate webcast. I think that could easily fill a full hour. I want to make sure we have a chance to open up for any verbal Q&A after hearing the first three parts of this.
I also think if we schedule another one, we can invite some of our language arts colleagues to come listen.
So any questions, anyone, for Berkeley or I, or Leah, or Andy, or anyone else?
So, hi, this is Carla. I have a question. I recently saw that four-square model with the consensus, I remember the consensus map, four corners consensus map. I saw that being used in a classroom, which was great. It was one of my student teachers. And my question is, one of the challenges I saw while using that was there were some ELLs in the class, and they were a lot more reluctant to put their thinking down on paper. I think they felt like they couldn't explain it as well as the other students. So what do you have any suggestions for how to maybe scaffold that for English language learners, maybe prior to adding their thoughts on the consensus map?
And then Berkeley, I'll let you finish up because I know you have more specific knowledge. If you go to the next slide, Leah, you can see that there on the one on the right, there are no words, or very few. And I think that we, that this conceptual piece of drawing what Berkeley was talking about, what's happening at the microscopic or the unobservable level that we then observe at the macro level. There's a lot of value in students just drawing their models and adding words that could be, you could have a word bank like we did with the model checklist that would be available for students to use. And Berkeley, I'm going to let you add on because I know that you've done this.
Well, yeah, I think that I would almost have, again, a couple scripts that are general enough that that they could be used, so you're not always having to build them in, although they're very easy, but just like a first, I see this, second, I see this, third, I see this. Even something as simple as that for an ELL student might provide, a couple sentences they can add. First, or the most important, the most important thing is, and they get to point to their model. But what I hear you saying is almost there's a hesitancy to even draw, and that would have to be maybe the culture of the classroom too, like students feeling valued no matter what they're saying, right? No, even if it's totally off base. And sometimes I will model that all of the time by sitting down with groups and asking a question that might seem obvious, or modeling what to do if you don't know. before we sit down, I don't know anything about this, but I can start by drawing this. And so giving them an entry point even into their model.
One of the things and the values about the 4 corners is that students can see what other students are drawing, and that's okay. We want to make sure that that's not considered to be copying, but it's considered that we're learning from each other. We're in a co-learning environment where students are learning from students, that the teacher is not the one that holds all the information, and that is a good thing, and not something to, in traditional classrooms, I feel that idea of copying can really shut down student thinking. So just like Berkeley was saying, the culture, building that culture.
It's a great question.
Any other questions for anyone?
I'll ask a quick question. What are ways that you're embedding these practices school-wide or district-wide that you've seen that are successful? Is it just exposing, like building that into a PD session, or are there other strategic ways that you've seen those practices take off?
I would say building them into PD, and as we're writing units, building them into the units with like specific examples and supports for teachers. I think that in Portland, we're just starting this kind of PD at middle and elementary, but I know that in the elementary PD that we've been doing to the new units, this kind of whiteboarding and student explanation is a pretty big part of the teacher experience in the PD. And these kinds of strategies, like when we're doing PD with teachers, focusing on the high leverage strategies and calling them out as where a lot of the shifts are, because, well, and I would say in middle and high school, teachers are comfortable with the content, but it's how we want them and the students to interact with the content that has changed. So it's really important to try to provide PD to this.
And I would just add, I think unless we slow down our PD and we provide teachers an opportunity to actually do it, it doesn't get used as much, if that makes sense. Like this even felt very rushed, but if you have an opportunity to introduce a tool, slow down and provide the opportunity for teachers to grapple with it, because that's what the student will experience, and then they can use it in their classroom.
Okay.
Well, we will make sure that if you have another question, we'll make sure that you get a chance to respond and include those by email. But in the interest of time, I think we're going to sign off for tonight. In the chat window is a link to our exit survey. And I think we've got all the issues around that fixed now, but this is a chance for you to help tell us what was most meaningful about this, topics that you might like to see in the future, and what we will send to you in response is a PDU certificate. So you get credit for that. And then in the chat as well, Leah posted about our April webinar. So we have a webcast set for April 16th at 4:30. And it is really going to be around this topic of cultural relevance. And you heard that Berkeley just referred to that a moment ago, talking about English learners. So it seems to be very timely and always a great topic. So Leah or Berkeley or Susan, anything else?
Thanks everyone for being here and joining us in the evening. I know it's not always easy to do that after a long day of work, but we're so glad that you were here.
I want to echo that. Thank you for your time tonight.
Great. Well, I think we'll see you next time, and be on the lookout for this recording on the website if there's something you want to see again. And we'll also post the the link to the slideshow and all the resources, so it'll be there for you as well.
Thank you, Leah.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everybody. See you next month.